Hey, welcome back to Sparking Innovation. This is a podcast from Provisio, the largest Salesforce implementation partner solely for human services. I'm Tom Moran, here to inspire nonprofits and government agencies to drive change in their communities by embracing change in their organizations. And today we're talking about nonprofit fundraising. So for many social workers, the process of securing grants and donations isn't the work that really drives them and motivates them. Helping people is, but it's a really necessary job that someone's got to do well to make all of that good helping stuff happen, right? And nonprofits are in a really tough position right now in terms of funding. And that's because the Trump administration, as you've been seeing in the news, is freezing billions of dollars in federal grants. So for many nonprofits, it's uncertain if those funds that they once relied on are still going to be there in the future. So it's really a crucial time right now to adapt and rethink conventional wisdom about fundraising. Think outside the box. And we have the perfect person here to do just that. And he's also just a really fun person to chat with. It's Fearghal Reid. He's the vice president and co-founder of Mason Consulting Group, which develops innovative fundraising strategies to help nonprofits not just survive, but thrive. Fearghal, thank you for joining the pod.
Thanks, Tom. Perfect and fun. Way to set that bar unrealistically high. I appreciate it.
I mean, I've talked with you a few times now before this, and I got to say, you're the kind of guy who could make a conversation about like dry toast interesting and fun. And that's a high bar.
That. That's a high bar.
Yeah.
I'll try and deliver.
All right. So Fearghal, as I said, nonprofits are, often kind of just like stuck in this survival mode, just trying to keep their heads above water. And that's, again, particularly true now. So what should nonprofits do to adapt during this period?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hot topic question, right? So I think, from a macro level, one of the things that they have to understand is this isn't, although it's eerily similar to what happened during COVID, where, nonprofits weren't able to operate as usual, and people weren't able to avail of their services, and a lot of those things were under threat. The reality is, with COVID, the community and the government did its best to rally around the situation, and nobody knew how long it was going to last, so everybody threw everything they had at it straight out the gate. Conversely, with this, we know that because there are political decisions and there are federal implications, this is a situation that's going to happen for at least 4 years. And then there's going to be a reaction to that for much longer. So I think that you got to consider the macro, and then from a micro level, the imperative would be for nonprofits to really switch their philosophical mindsets. The thing that people are asking is, when is this going to end? Is there going to be any resolution? Can we go back to normal? And the reality is it will never go back to normal. Even if the mechanisms that were used for those long-standing grants come back into play 4 years from now, they're not going to look the same. And everybody who is applying will probably be treated like they're applying for the first time. So they're going to have to change their philosophy. And I think one of the big things that nonprofits need to do right now is not wait and see what happens. I think they have to plan like this isn't coming back. They have to be proactive, and they have to lead from a position of strength. Nonprofits are the most resilient, the most innovative, and the most adaptive institution that you'll find, and they've had to do this time and time again, and I don't think this is going to be any different. So I'm sure we'll get into the particulars of what they can do, but I think fundamentally they have to understand that this isn't a temporary problem that they're going through. Even best case scenario, how long does it take to get something reinstated and back up and running, right? And then in the application process, and where's a nonprofit going to be in the meantime? So they really just have to come out swinging now, and to really focus on doing what they do better than anybody else, right? There's that adage that, governments are here to help with the problems that businesses can't solve, and nonprofits are certainly there to help with the problems that the government can't solve, and that's more important now than ever before.
Taking a step back now, I want to just more broadly from a 30,000-foot view talk about like what do you think is fundamentally broken or outdated about the way that most nonprofits have been approaching fundraising today, outside of what's going on right now?
Yeah, let me try and be politically savvy about how I answer this, not in terms of our local politics, but in terms of the business that I'm in. to take it back, maybe even a little higher than the 30,000 feet, you have to understand that for the longest time, there's been this conception about like what constitutes a good nonprofit. And Dan Pilato's written, I think, 2 books by now on this, and he goes into this point really, really well. There's this conception that a good nonprofit is the one that's like the most frugal, that the majority, how many dollars, how many cents on the dollar goes towards the individual served. That's what makes a good nonprofit. If they have low overhead, they're a great nonprofit. All the things that you would get murdered on as a business plan, right? So like not investing, not innovating, not diversifying, not putting time and resources into developing a 3-year plan and building some things that fail. Instead, people want to say, I give to this nonprofit because 90 cents, on every dollar goes to the individual served. And the author that I referenced, Dan Pilato, he does a great job of explaining how that's a little short-sighted, because the reality is, if you can invest a little bit more in your development and your infrastructure, and your technology, you can deliver those services at a higher level with a bigger impact to a greater amount of people, and you can really dramatically multiply and impact the amount of revenue that you can generate for your organization, which in turn leads to individuals served better and more individuals served. But we have it in our mindset because of some nonprofits that have done their very best to destroy trust, in terms of fraud and waste and the misalignment of funds. What that has resulted in is that everybody is a little hesitant. They want to see that transparency of where the dollars go. And transparency is always ultimately a good thing. But what happens as a result of that mindset is that it does 2 things. It certainly affects the general public whenever they're looking for a nonprofit to support, but it also influences the culture of philanthropy. So what happens is you have this definition of what constitutes a good nonprofit, and that influences people who have trusts and foundations that give towards causes. It certainly influences board members that sit on review panels. So they start to say that they start to prioritize, arguably wrongly, what it is that they're looking for from a nonprofit that's effective in its work. That influences those foundation officers who review those grants, or who recommend those solutions. And then in turn, what it does, in a very long-winded way to answer your question, is that influences the strategy that every nonprofit must take to apply for those funds. So they prioritize the things that are seen as a priority, as opposed to really pushing the impact of what it is that they can do. So the other thing that's happening in our community right now is the amount of dollars that go towards nonprofits is staying consistent. It's increasing slightly, but the number of donors is declining. So people who are invested in missions are doubling down on what they do, but everybody else, I think, is so worried about obviously their own circumstances in terms of their finances, and they're hesitant to support a cause because they're not sure where they're going to be. So the more the nonprofit is positioned as having a high overhead or anything else, it really does impact that market. So as a result, nonprofits are in that space of, like you said at the top of this conversation, they're in constant reaction mode. Everything is about, let's just get through this year. How can we do this on an annual basis? How can we secure these grants? How can we build something? We'll worry about sustainability next year. And that's one of the problems. The other thing is that this circumstance has kind of broken fundraising, because it will move people into realms of that grant dependency or over dependency on the sources of revenue that they have, really doubling down on the strategies that they've worked. And so as a result of that, they're still using kind of outdated tactics. Let me give you an example. Logically speaking, people try and work off straight math. So they say, if we do 3 fundraising or annual campaign letters a year and now we need more money, let's do 6 and we might raise twice as much money. When really what you do is you're burning people out. You're burning your staff out. You're burning, potential funders out who receive those appeal letters. Everybody is going back to what they know, and what they know is tremendously outdated and based on an outdated way of thinking about what constitutes a good nonprofit. So really what you have to do is you have to challenge the mindset, and you have to focus, I think, so much of nonprofit annual survival fundraising, and certainly since the current position that we found ourselves in, has been focused on reacting by trying to cast the net wider, like they're going for width, more funders. As hard as it is to do, you have to prioritize depth. You have to prioritize working with those existing funders that you have.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up this concept of nonprofits often spreading themselves too thin in the grant application process. It's almost like they're forced to fit themselves into so many, try to fit themselves at least into so many different boxes because each funder has different boxes that they need checked. And so you're forcing yourself to be a chameleon and be all things to all people every time. You want to try to dig deeper and do the things that you do well, but at the same time, you do want to try to apply for many grants. You would think, particularly with sources of funding kind of drying up right now. So it's like everyone's kind of looking for where is the water at. So what would be your advice to those nonprofits who do find themselves having to still apply for many types of grants? How do you get that money without spreading yourself so thin programmatically that you can't really live up to that expectation that you set for every single funder?
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult position, from the nonprofits themselves and even down to the grant writers, because what you don't want to do is you never want to get into the mission creep magpie. You see prioritized funders, you want to show how, what you do hits what they're looking for. And so you're promising all range of things, that you can't possibly deliver on. And again, everything that I'm talking about here is much easier said than done. But the reality is, fundraising is not a transactional relationship as much as people might think it is. It is a relationship that is built and developed and respected and nurtured. So the reality is, most nonprofits, for example, who write to foundations, unless there is a sit out, will be writing to them year over year over year. And a big part of what you don't want to do is you don't want to get into that used car salesman mentality, with sawdust in the gearbox. And instead, you really want to talk about what it is that you do well and what you don't do well. Now, I want to be careful in how I'm answering this. You do want to, again, really go deep on what it is that you do, what your unique value proposition is to the community, why your work is necessary, and you never want to do it by criticizing anything else that's out there. But the reality is, these funders have identified what they think is the problem and what they think are the key hallmarks of a solution. And that's what goes into the narrative in the PDF. They say, we want nonprofits that are, tell me about your partnerships, tell me about how you use data to track, et cetera, et cetera. They have these key marks. And people try their best to answer that. I think what I would challenge anyone in the grant writing space to understand is that there are ways to achieve what the funder is looking for from a programmatic perspective without just saying that you also do this. So for example, if you can do what you do well and you can partner with another organization that does some of those other requirements better than anybody else, then you are hitting that goal of the funder in two ways, right? One, you're proving how you can deliver those services to the client or the individual that you serve, which is incredibly important, and meeting their requirements. But secondly, you're also leveraging the strength of collaborative partnerships in the community. So now you have two nonprofits that could benefit from that foundation support. So do you know what I'm kind of see what I'm getting at here? You can hit the marks of what they're looking for, but you're not doing it by being a one-stop shop. You're actually doing it by being a partner. And I would imagine that any nonprofit funder would rather give to a network over a silo, because it allows you to push everything. You're then leveraging the diverse funding across those collaboratives. You're increasing the chance of sustainability of the program. You're showing how you're not in competition with anybody else, or that you're drawing funds from them, that you're really interested in providing the best solution for the individual that you serve. And that might not be by providing those services directly. And then even from a fiscal perspective, Tom, think of it this way. If I even redesigned a program to do everything that the funder was looking for, I could only serve as many people as my budget allows. Whereas if we're building out a partnership with multiple organizations, then we are serving as many people as that combined budget can allow, as well as dealing with all that overhead issue at the same time. So it's always going to be better positioned as a community solution.
Yeah. And so you talk often with funders, and I'm wondering if you could, everybody's different, obviously, but painting with a very, very broad brush, what should nonprofits know about what funders want and what they're looking for in those applications?
Yeah, I think the thing, if I could say one priority, it would be to understand that funders, foundation officers, people who review your grant, they want you to succeed. There's almost this mindset that you have to meet the requirements, like you're defending a thesis. And the reality is they're not looking for reasons to say no. They're looking for enough reasons to say yes. And one of the things that they want to understand is any foundation officer who's worth their salt will be able to spot and attempt to appeal to them a mile away. They're not interested in you repeating their language back to them. They're interested in understanding the heart of what it is that you do and at the impact. So helping them understand your mission, where you're strong, where you're weak, what it is that you're looking to do. And I think also they definitely want to see those collaborative partnerships. They want to see a focus on sustainability. I would even put it out there that a lot of nonprofits think, hey, we've got this great program. It's run by volunteers, so it doesn't cost anything. It's amazing. I think foundation officers and foundations look at that as, is it sustainable long term? They really are. Sustainability is not a dirty word. So having a mechanism in place where you're diversifying your funding, where you're showing them that you're attempting all these different ways and that you have a long-term strategy for the program that isn't dependent on asking them year over year, that you're going to try and innovate or expand, that you have a strategic plan, not just for the money, but for the program. And by the way, doing what you do year over year is completely awesome. It doesn't have to be something different every year. It doesn't have to be shiny, but you should be looking at depth, or you should be looking at reach. Those are the things that nonprofits really want to go. They want to really get the program up and running or support an established program and then build on it for the future and scale it. You're not going to be able to scale if you don't have an infrastructure in place. And funders need to know that as well. They need to know what you're going to do fiscally to sustain the program long term. They want to know programmatically what you're going to do to scale. And how are they going to do that? They're going to do that with data. What are your numbers? What is your impact? What has been your growth? The adage is true. It isn't about what you think or even what you feel. It's about what you can prove, right? So showing them that you have a mechanism in place for collecting that data, for reviewing your programs, for being fiscally accountable, give them all the reasons in the world to say yes. And it doesn't even matter, I think, arguably that your program is established. It can be something that's brand new or that you're working on proof of concept. But if you have a mechanism in place where you're looking to review that and improve it and get the feedback and the buy-in from the constituents that you're serving, those are things that all resonate really, really well with the funders, and that your mission is aligned with their mission and that their investment is really going to propel the impact that they're focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And so let's kind of move now into the technology portion of things, which is
All right.
our favorite thing here at Provisio.
Sure.
So where do you see the role of AI and CRM tools playing the biggest role in nonprofit development work in the future, in the next even just handful of years?
Yeah, if I could try to sum it up in a soundbite, it should be used to amplify connection and not replace it. Whether it's with the funder, whether it's with program officers, even whether it's with staff and the clients that you're working with, especially in the nonprofit realm, technology is not going to replace jobs. It can replace tasks that eat up so much of every department in a nonprofit's time that it detracts from them either serving the clients that they work with or the individuals that they serve, or, communicating with the funders in a way that they want to, or really building out those relationships with anybody who wants to volunteer or invest or support their cause. So, there's some practical things, and you guys are much better positioned to talk about this in terms of me, but from my own experience, really evaluating the CRMs that you could use, for example, to track that, everything from donor data to even leveraging tools. I mean, I'll say it like Salesforce because that's where my background's at, in order to do service delivery. Having those tools that can automate some of those processes from onboarding all the way through to tracking time and effort. And then from a fundraising perspective, having something in place that will allow you to track those donations, that will allow you to automate some of those follow-ups that you have, your schedules, using AI for post-meeting notes, really capturing the to-dos and the deliverables. Obviously, AI can be used for grant writing, and I'm a huge fan, both in terms of using technology platforms for research and for generating the proposals. But for the love of everything sacred to you, do not have it as your final draft of anything. It is always your first draft. It is always your think tank. It is always, a place to bounce ideas off and to give you leads on some research. But use that technology to help you cut down the time that you would spend procrastinating so that you can spend it doing what it is that you do. And then, you know, technically speaking, when it comes to something like annual giving, fundraising, or the potential for a comprehensive or a capital campaign, using that technology to help you get a better understanding of your donors' capacity and where they might move, to out of the messy middle that was referenced to support your nonprofit long term or over that course, you know, use those tools to cut down the busy work, use those tools to deepen your understanding of your markets and the individuals that you're working with, use it to streamline your processes, everything from an intake list all the way through to post follow-up. Another good trick that isn't my idea, I heard it on a podcast recently, our webinar, was, even after you get those grants, taking that documentation, that contract, and using it to truncate and give you a list of deliverables for the grant, just that memo, about what your deliverables are, and then put that front and center in your KPIs. Leverage that technology to make you go deeper in your job and not just say, well, it's going to write the grant for me, it's going to automate out 52, blog posts or emails out to people or spam them. People are inundated now with communication and they're inundated with process. The more that you can use those tools to streamline and deliver the services effectively and then strengthen the human connection, the better your nonprofit's going to be, the better your fundraising's going to be, the better your life's going to be, man. The better your marriage will be. I can tell you that much right now. It's all things that'll help.
Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, I believe you have a cautionary tale about relying too heavily on AI to write your grants for you. Something from about a funder who had seen too many
Yes.
AI generated grants. What
I,
was that little tall tale you had?
I did indeed. I mean, so the thing to remember about AI and how AI works, of course, is that it predicts, right? It's predictive text to the extreme. So in the absence of information, it will generate some out of thin air. I saw this even when doing some legal reviews. It just created cases and precedent. And so what has happened recently in the realm of fundraising is that you'll see these foundation officers and they're seeing, first of all, very obviously ChatGPT related proposals. And, that resulted in a wave of people coming out and saying, if you want to use AI, you have to learn how to prompt, right? To the prompters go the spoils. And so a lot of very entrepreneurial, minded companies produce this webinar on everything you need to know how to prompt for grants. And so what they did was they taught this class, and then a funder who was on a panel prior to the seminar, so as part of an all-day workshop, then ends up receiving almost a dozen proposals that were prompted exactly the same way and resulted in almost identical verbiage because it's open source. So they're looking
Yeah.
at all these different things and they're just seeing it. And what they do is, that results in two piles. So they'll just put that over here and then they'll focus on what they know is not, just trying to trick them. So be wary. I'm not saying be more creative in your subterfuge, but definitely be aware that, if you come up with this bright idea or somebody gives you the top tips for guaranteed grant success, they're giving it to everybody else as well, and that's going to result in a similarity in rating.
Yeah.
So just be cautious. Use it as your good first draft.
Sure. All right. So, final question to you. Overall, what are the keys to innovative fundraising strategies that are sustainable for nonprofits?
Yeah. What are the keys to innovative strategy? I think when you think innovation, you should think about sustainability. You should think about the sustainability of your development plan and your nonprofit approach. You should think about how you can be innovative in how you deepen the relationship. So a lot of what we kind of talked about before, leveraging technology to cut down on your administrative time so you really can build out those relationships. Be innovative in how you even use segment your approach. So actually my business partner and colleague published a great blog recently on how donors kind of fall into two main categories: those who think with their head and those who think with their heart. And it doesn't mean that the person who thinks with their heart doesn't think about things logically or look for return on investment or numbers, but their first reaction is either based on the numbers or based on the emotion that they feel. Segment your donors that way. Break them up into those two groups and then cater your messaging to them that align with their interest. You think about innovative ways that you can reach out to and share the news of what it is that you're doing. You know, how you can leverage and be innovative in really clarifying your message on what you do better than anybody else, and use it to invite partnerships, the things that we talked about before, those kind of collaborative efforts that will allow you to go as deep as possible. I think the other thing, you want to be innovative in your fundraising strategy, is you really do want to have a strategy. You know, as cliched as that sounds, you want to be thinking about, you know, a 3-year plan kind of at all times. You want to be thinking about when your fundraising may end up in a campaign, you know, how you want to build what it is that you're doing and the success that you're having and the way that you're messaging, so that when your campaign or your next big project does come around, your market is excited about where it is that you're going, and they want to invest, you know. And that's always trouble, because, you know, especially right now, nonprofits are going to be struggling to fund what they currently do. And that's hard to be innovative in their service delivery afterwards. And again, I think you should be looking at your AI and your predictive analytics. You know, even something like taking a survey and community feedback on how well you're doing, whether it's fundraising or whether it's, you know, in your service delivery, and using analytics to really quickly parse out those results and try and figure out if it's going to give you any leads on what the community's saying about what you're doing and where you might need to go. And I think, again, you know, ask AI how you can be innovative. Like, why not just, you know, throw that sounding board out there. And then, of course, the shameless plug is be innovative and work with a professional in this space. You know, people who spend their time and effort, who have seen what it's like to be successful in year-over-year fundraising, who know how to fit annual fundraising in the context of where you want to go in your long-term plans and strategies, who have some of those tools and techniques and best practices and operating procedures and templates and the things that you can use to really take what you do to the next level. And wherever you're innovating, make sure you're doing it in a way that deepens your connection with the individuals that you work with and the people that support you.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Sparking Innovation about fundraising. Fearghal Reid, thank you so much for joining. This was a really great conversation.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you work for a nonprofit or a government agency and are interested in how Provisio can help your organization become more efficient and effective through technology transformation or strategic advising, for example, contact us at provisiopartners.com. A link to the site is in the show description. And a link to Mason Consulting Group's website is also in the episode description, so be sure to check that out. And subscribe to this podcast to catch the next episode of Sparking Innovation. Thank you so much for listening.